I'm a junior high teacher, and this is pretty nice. Yes. Matt asked me how long I was going to talk, just to kind of get the length of the tape. At least I think that's why he asked. And I told him that I'm kind of locked into a 45 to 50-minute length because that's how long our class periods are. And he was hoping that I wasn't going to behave like a teacher, which is probably appropriate. How many of you know who I am? You've met me before, or will admit in public that you know who I am. When Cal called a few months ago to ask if I would do this, a number of thoughts passed through my mind. The first one was, I wonder how many other people they asked before they got to me. The second was, are you sure you have the right number? And the third was that he forgot what I was like when I was a youth at camp. And so I immediately decided we needed to pray for Cal's memory because obviously he'd forgotten a lot. My wife, who is in the back with our youngest son, I gave her some instructions on the way up here as far as signals to give me. The first signal is I tend to have bad hair months rather than a bad hair day. So if my hair is bad, she's going to do this, and so I can fluff it. That's it right there. The other one is if I ramble, she is going to put her finger to the side of her nose. And the third one is if I get boring, she's going to leave. So she for some reason moved to the back before I started. This is really a different experience for me. My CFO experience started a long time ago. I was 8 years old, and I went to Iowa CFO with Margaret Allen. I don't know how many of you know her. I don't know how many people Margaret Allen took to CFO, but it was many. And I can remember being 8 years old and going to a camp. My father at the time was not a Christian, and my mother was. And she was in a prayer group with Margaret Allen. And Margaret Allen had a checker car. People much younger than me probably don't know what a checker looks like. If you've ever seen a rerun of Taxi, that's a checker. They're huge. You could put a refugee family in the back of a checker and they could live quite comfortably in there. I mean, it is a huge car. And Margaret was in the front, and my mom was there, and then the three kids, my older brother, my older sister, and I were in the back, and I just remember how huge that car seemed. And we had luggage sitting in the back and then in the trunk, and they have huge trunks too. And I didn't quite know where we were going. I remember we were going to camp, and my mom had told me it was going to be fun. Oh, my wife has left. Oh, well. Oh, she's coming back. Good. Oh, okay. It was for the pacifier. I guess that's okay. Anyway, we were in this checker, and I was thinking about what in the world we were going to. And as an 8-year-old kid, how many of you went to CFO as a child, experienced that? See, over here that is a really unique experience, and unless you've gone through it, you have no idea what it's like, because suddenly you see adults behaving in very unadult ways, playing games and dancing, and to me as a child it didn't seem too odd. My mother was, and still is, a rather free person. And we got there, and Storm Lake is a beautiful place, and it's a big lake, and it was at a university. And I think I couldn't remember. I was trying to remember. I think I attended 3 CFOs at Storm Lake. It's either 2 or 3. And we stayed in dormitories, and they were air conditioned. And at the time that I was growing up, my parents were not. My dad was farming, which kind of tells you our economic situation. And we didn't have air conditioning in our house, so it was pretty cool to have, cool in more ways than one, to have air conditioning. And my CFO experience, that first one was as a kid, and I have a picture somewhere. I kind of thought about bringing it, but I decided against it because I had a crew cut, and my hair was even worse then. Well, there's a picture of us as a bunch of kids in CFO, and they took a class picture, and they sent us all copies of it. And there are these faces of these people who have been friends of mine for a long time. And, I think Phil is in there, and Dave, Priscilla's sons, and a lot of other people. And the thing I remember about that CFO was that numerous butterflies gave up their lives to make lucite paperweights. And that was our activity. We caught butterflies and then embedded them in lucite. And it was pretty cool, and I don't know where my paperweight is now. I'm sure it's my mom saves things like that. I'm sure it's somewhere. And the other thing was somewhere around that neighborhood, it was the first year or second year, I remember watching the high school youth, which my brother was in, just starting high school at that time, playing Crack the Whip on the big open lawn between the chapel and the dormitories. I think that's covered with a building now, I'm not sure. And as an 8 or 9-year-old kid, grabbing hold of the end of a line of Crack the Whip with about 40 high school kids, it's the closest I've ever come to flying without an airplane. And so for me, my early memories of CFO are primarily my friends, and that Jesus was there, watching over us as little kids. But my early memories are of sort of lessons and sort of fun things that talked about Jesus and fun songs. But then the rest of it is just these people that I met. And it was so strange growing up because my best friends, I would see them twice a year. And some of them lived in Minnesota, exotic places like Minnesota. Bigelow, Minnesota, of all places. It seemed so far away at the time. And then as I grew up in camp, tremendous experiences. I remember we went to, I think from Storm Lake, we attended camp at Cedar Falls at the assembly grounds up there. And that was where I can identify my first knowledgeable step in a walk with Jesus. I've been asked when I became a Christian, and I really have a hard time saying. My mom did a real good job, my dad did a great job bringing us up, all three of us kids. And I'm not sure there's an instance when I can say, this is when I became a Christian. I know when I was baptized, and I know when I took my first communion, and those things were important to me. But at Cedar Falls, Ruth Carter Stapleton talked, and I think Father McNutt. And all I remember is that it seemed like 1 million people at that camp, yeah, and all these youth. And I remember her son, whose name I can't remember, Mike, thank you, came and talked to the youth. And he was in the group, and he'd played basketball with us. And at that point, I think we were into walkie-talkies. And Priscilla had her trailer up there. And Dave, who to me was the technical wizard at the time, was always repairing these homemade walkies. Well, they originally purchased walkie-talkies. They'd gradually become homemade as we replaced the parts. And I can remember Dave repairing a walkie-talkie by heating a knife with a candle and then dripping wax onto a wire to hold it in place. And that's pretty creative repairs. Anyway, Mike had played with us and entered in all this stuff. We played an amazing game of Foursquare, which I've never seen played before, kind of full contact Foursquare. Don knows what we're talking about. And then he came and talked to the youth, and I have no idea what he said. And I just remember him talking, and suddenly I began to cry. And somebody asked me why I was crying, and I said I didn't know. And some people prayed for me, and I stopped crying. And that was kind of it. And I felt pretty good. And one of the other things that was nice about Iowa CFO is my birthday always happened during CFO. And so it was somewhere around my birthday in July. From that experience, we went down to Lamoni, and that's when I really began, for a while, a rather intense walk with Jesus, at least for a week every year. And that's the great struggle of a CFO kid, is getting beyond that weekly existence for 1 year and then having something that's real the rest of the time. But before that 1 week, it was rather intense and emotional and amazing. And I remember somewhere along the line, Phil and Dave Bear, who were by this point some of my closest friends, and another good friend of ours, Kevin Coker, wanted me to go to Coronas, which is the Minnesota CFO, the home camp. And so I said, yeah, let's go. And my mom was at camp that year, and she said, okay. And I was I was working on my uncle's farm baling hay, and so I had the money to go, and plus I got a scholarship. And so I went up, and actually from Iowa camp, I went and stayed with Priscilla and Kevin for a week in LaPorte, and just kind of left home, and my parents were probably pretty relieved at that. The food bill dropped noticeably. And hung out there and went up to Coronas, and there was a girl up there that I had met, I think before that. I'm not sure. Had we met before that or after that? Yeah, I think so. She was short and brown. That's all I remember. And I met a whole bunch more friends there, and people that have continued to be part of my life. And I met my wife there, and I met, oh gosh, so many people, so many friends that have. We've developed this relationship over distances, and I know people in the Philippines because of CFO, and I know people at Duke, North Carolina because of CFO, and I know people in Denver and in California, and yet there is a commonality there. It's really not the institution of CFO. I mean, it's a great place to go, but it's Jesus that ties us all together. And as a teacher, one thing that I get exposed to a great deal is bureaucracy and the frustrating aspects of that. And I've come to the conclusion that God puts up with organizations only in the way that they allow people to meet Jesus. And as long as CFO has people meeting Jesus, it's going to be alive. And in those relationships that I've built, I've been through a lot. I've cried with a lot of people, and I've laughed with them, and I've got in trouble with them. I've sunk canoes with them. I've swum where I wasn't supposed to swim, and I've gone out late at night, and I've married one, and I've had kids, and I've taken my kids to CFO. My oldest son went to CFO about the age of 1. My other two one of them went in the womb, and the other one, how old was Matthew when we went to Coronas? 1 month old. I did high school youth at Coronas with a 1-month-old baby last year. That was an experience. But through all these things, Jesus has blessed me. And to be honest with you, I have not been as faithful with him as he has been with me, and I'm sure most of us can say that. And I looked at the theme, trust and obey, and as I started to organize things for what I felt like I wanted to talk to you about, I wasn't sure how that fit in with what I was going to say until I heard the song. And as we were sitting there singing, it really hit me that I'm a person that deals with problems. I'm a crisis person. I sort of wait for things to get to a certain level, and then I want to deal with it to get rid of the crisis. And that's probably a healthy attitude for a junior high teacher, because they're going to happen all the time. I mean, I've got kids with a bloody nose or whatever in the classroom. And I ask myself, what is it that stops me from trusting and obeying Jesus? And that's how I approach things. That's the way my brain works, is what stops me from trusting Jesus? And I've come to the conclusion, and I haven't solved this problem, but what stops me from trusting him is I don't really know him. And that if we really knew Jesus, if we really knew him, if we could recognize him in the ways that we meet him and in the places that we see him and in the way people express him to us, if we could really see him, we would change the world. Not because we'd go out knocking on doors and handing out tracts of the 4 spiritual laws, but because we would be changed. Every once in a while, I startle myself by saying something kind of insightful. At least I like it. My wife doesn't always approve, but I like it. And I remember I was in a sort of a political discussion with some friends of mine. And we were off on, I don't know, secular humanism or something. And suddenly it hit me that they said that the real problem with the world is not secular humanism or not whatever, it's bad Christians. and that we're the only ones that know. And how can you expect non-Christians to behave in any other way? The heathen are going to be heathen no matter what laws we pass or how we expect them to behave. But the people that can radically change the world are Christians. And the only way we can radically change the world is if we confront Jesus and if we allow him to confront us. And he's always there to confront us. He is always there. We must react to him. And often my reaction to him is to veer to one side a little bit, to not really face him, the risen Lord, to look him in the eyes and to allow that to change me. Because our relationship with Jesus is him changing us. And he changes us by simply existing in our lives. His presence changes us in ways that go beyond what we conceive beforehand. And when I think about that, I get frustrated with me more than anything else. I'm sort of a perfectionist. I don't like mistakes a lot, especially my mistakes. And I get very frustrated with me, and I'm sure a lot of you are kind of in that boat. Obviously, I'm not a perfectionist with my haircuts, but in many other aspects of my life, I am sort of a perfectionist. And fortunately, I don't express that on other people a lot. It's kind of internalized. I'm not real demanding of people around me most of the time. But with me, I am. So I get very frustrated with my own walk. And Jesus keeps saying to me through different methods and through different people that, you're not alone. This kind of odd relationship happens with everyone, that everyone misses the boat a little bit. The other day we were I was talking with our pastor. We're in kind of a real interesting church. I think I may share more about that later. But he was saying, one thing he shared with me when we first started going there, we kind of got recruited. I think we were almost drafted into this church before we even knew it to start be involved in the new music ministry they're doing. And he told me they have a doctrine of what he calls accelerated failure. And this idea, this is Mike Wagner's idea, so I have to footnote this. The idea is that you're always going to fail a lot in doing anything. And there's a certain number of failures you have to get through before you reach success. And so he encourages people to fail as often as possible and as quickly as possible so you can get to the success. And he told me he actually wrote for a goal for one of our staff members at church is that she needed to fail more next year. And the other thing he told me is that Jesus always uses failures. Always uses failures. The people that appear to have it all together to the outside world are the ones that Jesus says, I came for the sick. And that's the Pharisee. It's those of us who are willing to say, gosh, I'm a failure too, and allow Jesus to continue to confront us and change us. Those are the ones he uses. And he cited all sorts of examples, and you can probably generate them. Everybody from David to Peter to Paul. all these people that had apparently failed, and yet that's who Jesus uses. So that's kind of refreshing to know, and the name's on backwards. That's refreshing to know and to keep those kinds of things in mind. So this weekend, I think what I'm going to be talking about is who is this man? Who is Jesus? And to kind of share a little bit with you about who he's letting me know he is, and hopefully you can share with me too. I kind of like dumb movies. In fact, I like them a lot. I like movies that are kind of sometimes intentionally bad, but generally unintentionally bad. And I'll stay up late at night to watch a pretty bad movie. Generally science fiction ones, because they can get really bad very quickly. And anything with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it is probably going to fall into that category too. So, but one of my favorite bad scenes from a movie, and I don't quite mean this the way it sounds, but is John Wayne in the movie The Greatest Story Ever Told. If you've ever seen that movie, they cast John Wayne as a centurion at the foot of the cross. And during the crucifixion scene, they have John Wayne looking at the cross and saying in a John Wayne voice, "Surely this man was the Son of God," delivered in that tone. And we often mouth who Jesus is, like John Wayne was reading that script. And I'm not making any judgment on whether or not John Wayne really knew who Jesus was, but in that script, it sure didn't sound like it. And so as we explore some things out of the Bible and of kind of what God's been teaching me, that's what we want to move to, so that we can really say this man was the Son of God and mean it. If you have your Bibles, if you'd open to Luke 2:41. This is a real well-known passage, and this is about Jesus in the temple. And I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to point out some stuff, and then we'll hit some verses. We'll be going through 41 through 52. It sets it up at the start and tells where Jesus is going to go to the temple with his family, and he's 12 years old. And I feel like I'm kind of an expert on 12-year-olds. I've taught junior high for 6 years out of the 8 years I've been teaching, and I teach 7th grade. And 12-year-olds are a unique breed of human being. What's good is that we either all were 12 years old or we were going to be 12 years old at one point. So it's a common experience. And I always tell junior high kids that the good news for them is that they won't be there forever. Some of them will be there longer than others, but they'll not be there forever. We have a kid right now in our school who's on the 4th year of junior high. So she's getting it right this time, which is pretty exciting. Anyway, so this is a 12-year-old boy. He goes to the temple with his parents. And the temple at that time, as I'm sure many of you know, was quite a place. And at Passover, it was very busy. And they lost him. And it took a day on the way home to figure out that they lost Jesus, that his mother and father had lost him. I don't think I really experienced the full feeling of that until I had kids. And then suddenly you know what it means to lose a kid. And then they probably spent a day going back and a day looking for Jesus. And finally they found him. And you can imagine, those of you who are still in this age group, you know how ballistic your parents go when you're late 2 hours. Okay, he's late 3 days. And those of you who are parents know the feeling, and just multiply that, to the power of 10, and you'll probably get close. And they looked for him, and of course they found him in the temple, and he was debating with the scholars in the temple. I've debated 12-year-olds before, but I don't think it was quite like debating Jesus as a 12-year-old. And they found him, and Mom says, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you," which is a pretty typical mom response, I think. And Jesus replies, "Why were you searching for me?" He asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. And then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. If anyone at that point should have known who Jesus was, it was Mary. She was told by kind of divine intervention who Jesus was, and the experience of his birth, his conception and his birth, had to make it very clear to her. And yet, when the point of crisis came, and there were other points of crisis, they had to flee home because Jesus was going to be killed. And they had these strange people from foreign countries bringing gifts to them kind of out of the blue. And probably all the other incidences of raising a kid. My wife left me yesterday with our 8-month-old on the bed. And I thought it was one of our older kids, so I didn't pay any attention to him. And I kind of caught his tail end going over the edge of the bed and heard the thud on the floor and the scream, and I went and grabbed him. And with the third kid, it's not quite as traumatic. They're pretty resilient. And I picked him up, and he was okay. But those crises that happen over and over, at least we think he's okay. We'll probably find out in a few years. I think I had a similar experience as a child, actually, which might not be real good. Yes, I am the third one, so. Anyway, all the crises that happen as a parent, the near-death experiences that you have, and of course they're the ones that you don't tell your parents about. Um, you know, every time that happened, it was a moment of faith for Mary, because she had been told very clearly what this child was all about, and yet here he was lost, and she panicked, like I would, or like you would. I don't think we would have been any different than Mary. And probably she panicked more because she knew this was a unique child. And yet when she goes back and confronts him, it's very clear that Mary does not conceive fully the reality of Jesus. And of course she can't. None of us can. How can we conceive God in our minds? And he tells her very lovingly, but firmly, that this is what I'm about. This is why I'm here. Of course I'm in my Father's house. And Mary internalized that, and I think that was probably another step in her beginning to see who Jesus really was. Another incident that I want to take a look at, this is a real famous one, is Luke 4:14 through 30. And I'm not going to read all these, but this is the one where Jesus goes back to Nazareth to teach. And he goes to the synagogue, as it says, as it was his habit, he went to the synagogue. And he read a section from Isaiah. I like Isaiah. Isaiah kind of puts it where it's at. And it was about proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor, where everyone's going to be released from servitude. And he gets done, and he says to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. And after that it says, all spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son, they asked? And I think initially they were asking, this is one of our guys. This is a guy from Nazareth. Man, he's smooth. Where did he get this? Because the Nazarenes were not the most polished people living in the world at that time. They were kind of the hillbilly clique, I guess. And they were pretty proud. And then Jesus goes on to read more, or to say more. And he's talking about how I'm not here for you. And just like Elijah, when he was looking for someone to talk to end the period of drought, did not go to a widow who was a Jew. He went outside. And this angered them. And if you look at 28, it says, all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this, and they got up and drove him out of town and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him down the cliff. But he walked right away through the crowd and went on his way. Well, Jesus had confronted them, and the reaction wasn't real positive. Because he didn't fit what they wanted him to be. They saw Jesus, they were pleased with him at the start, but when he confronted them with the reality of himself and what he was all about, and how the salvation wasn't just for the Jews, it was for everyone, they veered by him again and took a pretty sharp turn and turned on him, even to the point that they wanted to kill him. Now, throwing people off cliffs was not an unusual way of execution in those days. It was part of Roman law. So it wasn't that this was, gee, what should we do? Let's find a cliff and throw them off. This was part of their culture, and they were reacting to this. They were going to get rid of him. And yet, Jesus continued his ministry. And Jesus continues on whether we know his reality or not. He continues to do what he does. He continues to be Jesus, and that's all he has to be. That's all he has to do, is to exist for us. One more is in Matthew 3:16. This is another well-known section. Well, I could say that about all of it, couldn't I? It's kind of redundant. And this is the one where Jesus is talking to the disciples. And I think I said the wrong verse. It's 16:13. Did I say the wrong verse? 16, 13. He's asking them, who do people say I am? Some said, you're John the Baptist, another Elijah, another one of the prophets. And but what about you? Who do you say I am? And Peter, being Peter, spoke up, said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You wonder what the reaction was. Wonder what Peter's reaction was. Because Jesus replies, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but my Father in heaven. And I think the significance of this verse is that the only way that we can really begin to know Jesus is through the grace of God. That somehow when he came to us, when he came in a physical form, and ministered God's grace to us in a real significant way, he created a method through which we can come to know him, where we can come and be confronted by him, healed by him, made whole by him, changed by him in a way that didn't exist before. And he's telling Peter, look, this is right. You're right. I am the Son of God. But you don't know this by yourself. You can't know this by yourself. You know it because of God's grace, because of the graces that he has ministered to you. And that grace, I think, is something I don't understand. When I was talking about the kids surviving childhood, I grew up on a farm, and we played a lot. We had 40 acres of timber to play in, and hay mows and all sorts of things. And I always liked the games we played as a kid. I hope my kids can play these games because they're fun. And my mom wouldn't have approved, but they were fun. My parents bought us a set of plastic bowling pins somewhere along the line. There were 12 of them. You know, so when you lose 2, you still have 10. And they were hard plastic. And one of my memories of childhood is my brother I think was born 6 feet tall. He was always taller than us, and he was tall real early in life. He was probably about junior high. I think he was 6'2" and probably 130 pounds. Very tall, thin guy. The coaches thought they were going to have a 7-footer, and he never grew after that. And Dan was pretty athletic and strong and just kind of like a rope. I mean, he was so thin. And I used to have friends over, usually cousins, because that's who you played with, you know, on the farm. There wasn't anybody else around. I'd have cousins or friends over. And we played this game, and we would divide up the bowling pins. And Dan would get 6, and whoever was with me, 1 or 2 friends, we would get 6 pins. My brother, who's a carpenter, and we should have known early because when we were kids, he would go up in the hay mow. And this is when we still had square hay bales and those big round things. Those are terrible. They're no fun. And we had square bales up in the hayloft, and we had a big barn. And Dan would go up there and he'd drag up 2 by 6s, and he would make tunnels and rooms in the hay. And the whole place was tunnels. It was terrible for the hay, but it was great for playing. And my dad didn't seem to mind. We didn't have a lot of livestock. We always had more hay than we needed. And so we'd go up there and we'd play this game. And the rules of the game were that if you got hit with a bowling pin, the guy that hit you got your bowling pins. And so we would kind of be on either side of the hay mow. It seemed huge at the time. It seemed like it was the length of a football field. And here, you know, I was 8 or 9 years old, and we had our bowling pins. And we're peeking out from behind stacks of hay. And I don't know why, but suddenly we'd go running across the hay mow. And my brother would jump up and with these long arms would throw this bowling pin on the side of the head. We'd go flying, and we'd give him the bowling pins. And it'd take about 15 minutes, and he'd have all the pins. And then we would beg him to play again. Oh, come on, Dan. Please play. And he'd play. I don't ever remember Dan losing that game. But eventually, Dan was going to be confronted with the reality of a brother growing up. Now, I was never as tall as Dan, and I'm probably as heavy as Dan, but I was never as tall as Dan. I still can't be. And he still does a lot of things better than me. He's a better skier, he's a better singer, all sorts of things. But The other thing we used to play a lot was ping pong, and Dan made a ping pong table in shop class, and it was his pride. We didn't have we had a basement in our house, but it was an earth floor basement. So Dan cleaned out one of the old hog sheds that we weren't using anymore and put the ping pong table up in there. So we call it the ping pong building. And we would go out and we'd play ping pong in there, and he would kill me every time. And one time I was probably about 12 because it was right before we moved off the farm, and I was playing ping pong with him and I beat him. And he was probably 18 and I was 12. And I wanted to leave. I had reached a goal in my life, and Dan had been confronted by a 12-year-old, and a typical 12-year-old, who had beat him in ping pong, and wanted to play again, and refused to let me leave. Proceeded to lock the doors and windows of the shed until I would play with him. And I can remember glaring at him, and he was we weren't really chasing in a full speed chase. It was kind of a slow motion chase around the ping pong table. And I got into such a position that I could escape. And I remember I jumped out a window and proceeded to run to the house screaming, "Mom, Mom." With Dan hot on my heels, and he was faster than me. And the only advantage I knew I had is I'd gone through the window and he had to unlock the door to get out. And I can remember running to the house and knowing I had to get there before he got me. Because if he got me, he was going to drag me back to the shed. And I can remember leaping onto the front step and crashing into we had a mud room, and then crashing into the kitchen. And, "Mom, Dan has blocked me in the shed. He was going to beat me up, you know." And I don't remember what he said. I knew that I was safe at that point. But Dan was confronted by the reality of me growing up. And those kind of confrontations are what makes us grow. And I can remember another instance with my brother. I don't know if this has to do anything, but I remember this. I always used to want to do whatever my brother told me to. And he'd go get me a drink of water. "Okay, I'll go get you a drink of water." I'd go get him a drink of water. And at some point, those of you who are younger brothers can probably identify with this. At some point I realized, I don't want to do this. And suddenly the fun was gone from being a slave. And he told me to do something, and I said, "No." And I remember the stunned look on his face. "No. No." Okay. And he got up and got the drink himself. He never asked me again. But again, that was one of those instances of confrontation that changed him, and it changed me too. It changed our relationship. I do need to add that my brother is probably my closest friend, other than my wife. But my brother is very close to me, and so these are all. If he ever hears this, it's all in love, Dan. And there are other instances where we are confronted by reality. Tragic instances and funny instances. One of my other memories of CFO is a camp, 12 years ago, where we were at Coronas, and we got a phone call that Josie and I think we were engaged. Josie and I dated for 6 years, and we were kind of engaged most of that time, but it was never official. So we were kind of engaged. We were really close, and we got a call that Josie's dad had heart trouble and had gone to the hospital. And we jumped in the cars to come back, and we just got to camp. It was the day we arrived at camp. It was a Monday. Corona starts on a Monday, and we got the call probably, 2 o'clock in the morning, midnight. And so we packed up all our stuff, and we decided to come back. And I was reminded of this. I was driving home with my cousin from skiing in Minnesota a few weeks ago, and we went by one of the truck stops where we'd stopped, and it just all came back. And I was talking to my cousin, is a good friend of mine, Joe, and I was telling him about it. And I remember that trip back from Coronas, and half asleep in a cramped car, not knowing what had happened, and getting to the hospital and walking in. By the time we got back, it was light. I remember that. And walking into the hospital and walking up to the desk, not knowing what the situation was. And reality was waiting to confront us. We had no idea. We walked up and we asked for Faustino Turonis, and they didn't have any record of him. And at that point, my heart just sank, because I knew what that had meant. I'd worked in hospitals. And they kind of, remember the people at the desk kind of talked a little bit back, and the chaplain came out. And, you knew that he was dead. And that's a lot of memories. And that's a confrontation of reality. The suddenness of our existence. And yet, through that confrontation, Jesus was making himself known to us in a new way. Behind that reality, and behind everything that is real, is Jesus. Ephesians talks about the light and how the light illumines all things. And what isn't light isn't illumined. So with Jesus behind the reality, with Jesus there making it real and welcoming us to him and being him, those things change us. And yet at the last minute, we may veer off and miss the real target, the real Jesus that's still waiting there to meet us, always waiting there. And those instances that shape us and shape our lives, if we look at it from that perspective, if we look at it from the perspective that Jesus is the ultimate reality, waiting to change each one of us, this journey through life takes on a new meaning. And these instances of confrontation with the essence of Jesus, there was no one else we could rely on in that instance. And then a number of years later, Josie's mom died. And this was after a real long illness. And if you've ever experienced that, it's a real weird experience to go through, because there are instances of incredible irony and humor and tragedy kind of all rolled into one. And one of the instances I always remember from when her mom was in the hospital is the chaplain came in to see us. And he was a Lutheran chaplain, and either Austrian or German, just had a very thick accent still. And walked in, and this was kind of in the middle of her long illness, and walked up to Josie and says, I don't know, something about, I can see right into your brain that you are troubled. And the way he rolled his R's and said it, we all laughed, and that's why he'd done it. And yet, there was a reality there too. We were troubled, and he was there. I don't think we ever saw that chaplain again. He was on a rotation. We never saw him again. And yet, just that comment broke the thickness of the air around us. And always liked that accent ever since. So Jesus is going to confront each one of us with reality, and I hope he confronts you this weekend, and in some ways I don't hope he confronts me, because it brings about some pain. Sometimes it brings about pain, sometimes it brings about other things, humor and excitement. And yet, as we continually seek after him, we will get closer and closer to the target. I really believe that. One of the other sections that really kind of jumped out at me as I was preparing for this was Hebrews. And I want to take a look at a couple verses in Hebrews, and then that'll probably be about it. I didn't mean to get this serious tonight. I'm sorry. Okay, good. I want you to look at Hebrews 10, 11, and 12. Chapter 10, verses 11 and 12. And Hebrews is kind of an interesting chapter, or interesting book, in that we can read it and profit from it, but it's almost like reading a letter addressed to someone else. Because it's designed for the Jewish Christians in the early church. And there's a lot, it's a valuable book for us, and it's important for us too to read it. But it's got these implications that unless you know about Jewish culture, unless you've experienced that, it may not mean a whole lot to you. And what he's talking about here is the Spirit is speaking through the writer. They're not sure who wrote Hebrews, but he's speaking through the writer here to the Jewish people. And so we can listen in on this conversation and get truth out of it for us. And he's talking about all the sacrifices in the temple and how that just didn't work and how that didn't take away the sin. It had to be repeated over and over again. In 11, he says, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he's meaning Jesus, he sat down at the right hand of God. Since that time, he waits for his enemies to be made his footstools, because by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. And in our lives, we create this kind of cycle of ritualism for ourselves, of performing rituals over and over again, whatever they may be. It may be church attendance, it may be Sunday school teaching, it may be whatever is your little ritual that you think you're performing for Jesus to somehow get his favor. Whereas really, he is simply standing there with the completed sacrifice, waiting for us to recognize that and to allow him to confront us with his reality, to be who he is in our lives. And that speaks to me because I'm kind of a compulsive. I like things a certain way, and I like a certain pattern to my life, and I like getting up at the same time, and I like things to be real regular. My wife could tell you how I don't particularly like change. Even rearranging furniture kind of disorients me for a while. My wife, on the other hand, is a person, during the 6 years between when we started dating and when we married, she lived in nearly every apartment building in Des Moines, Iowa. At least it seemed like it, because I moved her, and they were all on the third floor. She would never move into a ground story apartment. So when she married me, Mr. Stable, or Mr. Boring, however you want to view it, we both had to adapt. I don't want to move all the time, and so I have to put up with rearranged furniture occasionally. Anyway, so I'm kind of this compulsive person who likes everything the same, and I create these rituals for myself. And of course, I excuse God from a lot of these rituals. And this passage is saying, look, you're doing the same things over and over again, these same things for me. Just see where Jesus is. Just see the reality of Jesus there with the completed sacrifice. Just waiting for those, because by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. It doesn't say those who are holy. It says those who are being made holy. That's you and me. If you started that relationship with Jesus, if you've started that walk, we're being made holy, and he's just there for us. And all the little rituals and all the little stuff that we do, we don't have to worry about anymore. That's kind of fun. Those kinds of instances are freeing and are relief to us. And so the reality of Jesus is not always a burden. I don't know how you imagine God. There's another verse in Hebrews. I think it says it is a fearsome thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Now that's my view of God. Okay? And that's a scary thought, isn't it? And it's not it's not the Allstate hands, It's the hands of a living God. This isn't it. If you've read any of C.S. Lewis's stuff, they talk about in the Chronicles of Narnia, they talk about Aslan. He is not at all a tame lion, and Jesus and God is not at all a tame God. It's a fearsome thing. And so my perspective of God is this God that is sort of an Old Testament kind of God, with the flaming sword, and God in the big picture, God has our best interest in mind. I'm not sure what that means for me, and there's always somewhere in the back of my mind this assumption that my best interest may be an incredible lot of suffering and hard time in my life. I always have kind of this impression that's what's going to happen to me, and so it's difficult for me to trust God wholly. And yet Jesus is still there, confronting me with the reality that you are being perfected, you are being made holy. And I do have your best interest in mind. That's the reality. I am at the right hand of God, interceding for you. Just recognize it. And just continue to allow, through divine intervention, through the work of the Holy Spirit, just allow the Spirit to allow me to see Jesus more fully as I grow. It seems kind of weird me telling you people this. Well, good. I hope so. Well, Linda, I don't feel weird telling you. You're my age, so. The rest of you some of you could be my older brother. So that's kind of a neat verse. That get rid of your ritualism. Just one verse I'm going to leave you tonight. Another one's in Hebrews 11:16, so we'll stay real close. I'm going to start in 15, and I'll start at 13. This is after this is kind of in the middle of the spiritual honor roll. By faith, by faith, by faith. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the thing promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country that they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. And then this is the verse. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. That's a neat verse. Longing for a better country. And what that really means is that Jesus is wanting to pull us out of our little world of reality that we've created for ourselves and the perspective that we have on him. And of course, this is an ongoing process. He's going to do this all the time. As soon as we get comfortable, he's going to jar us again and confront us with his reality again and move us further and further on into that heavenly country. Not meaning that when we die and go to heaven, that's part of it. But it's heaven coming here, into me and into you. This will give you another perspective on my makeup. Josie and I were talking on the way up here, and 3 kids under the age of 4 and the holidays and stuff created a pretty tense time for us. And we were kind of on each other's case and on end. And since then, we've had really a pretty good time, and we're starting to have more fun together again. That's always good. And we were talking about on the way up here, we've really just been able to enjoy each other for a while, just to laugh and goof around. And this is how I've kind of changed her, probably in an unfortunate way, is that I always talk about the soap opera disease. And when I was in college, I watched soap operas a little bit. And actually, for a year, I was unemployed after we got married. I didn't have a teaching job. So I watched soap operas. And I never quite got into them. They're kind of interesting as a kind of a cultural investigation, what is it about these? And I can rationalize it many different ways. And one of the things that I noticed about soap operas is I think I could write one now. And one thing I noticed is that if you want something bad to happen to somebody, you have them say in one of the shows leading up to it, I have never been happier in my life. Because instantly they're going to get hit by a bus, have some, unheard of disease that no one has ever, no doctor knows how to treat. They're going to find out that the person they're married to is actually their stepbrother who they were separated from at birth, or they had a Siamese twin that they didn't know about, something like that. That's a little close to reality there. So I'm always expecting those things to happen whenever we say we're happy. And Josie said she didn't really want to talk too much about it because she's afraid something bad was going to happen soon. And probably something will happen. We'll probably have a crisis eventually. But it's a building process, that each crisis that occurs, and as the crises build up, we are better equipped to handle them because we are more familiar with who Jesus is. And he's equipping us for those. And so if we don't look at them as a crisis, if we look at them as still another incident to confront the reality of Jesus, it sounds a little better. And of course, it reminds us that Jesus is right there behind whatever the reality is confronting us. So as we go through this weekend, being a teacher, I have to bring this to closure. That's one of the things. Lauren, did I state my objectives at the start clearly, or questionable? Okay. Madeline Hunter would not be happy. Bringing this to closure, that as we go through this week, that my prayer for me and for you is that Jesus will confront us somehow this week in a way we've never known before. That is sort of a scary prayer, and the reason I can say this is that you probably won't see me for a while, so if things begin to happen to you, you won't be able to blame it on me. So I just ask that as we go through this week that he'll do that. I think we'll close with a word of prayer, and then we'll move on. Father, thank you for this group of people, and Father, I really thank you for what's going to happen in my life this weekend, and that when I leave here, it's going to be with a better understanding of who you are, and that as we each take that understanding with us as we go, that you'll continue to build on that to make us more and more into the image of your Son, to make us more aware of your activity in this world. Change our hearts and change our minds to be more and more like that of Jesus. Father, thank you that you're really patient with us, and that your patience doesn't end, because we would test it if it did. But thank you for your faithfulness to us and your grace. We ask that all the structural and organizational things this week would work smoothly. And I thank you for the group of people you have. I can't say that enough. And Lord, just bless them. In Jesus' name, amen.